All right, week 4, learn together. What an important week of concepts. What really each week is in this class. I bet you feel that by now. So let me just move over for a second. So this week, objects, right? And using, this object reference, understanding it is how it's passed by reference or by value. Such an important thing. It came up again in my React class and really for any JavaScript class. But then covering methods, how to write functions inside of objects, and then exploring some of the string and number, and then using const. So from this point forward, there really should be only two type of variable declarations you use, either let or const. And functions can be, it seems to me, 100% const. I can't imagine not using them now that you understand const. And I like that he went over the idea of var, because var is still around and you're going to see it. I just don't want to see you using it because as a community, we're moving away from var for kind of the reasons talked about, because it is a little more confusing about understanding the scope. So anyway, great content this week. All right, so for week 4, we're going to do more. And some of you may groan a little bit, but I want you to learn more, use more of the developer tools in this week. So what I did, and you'll need to do the same thing. You don't have to do what I've shown, because what I decided to do, because really in this section, there was really two ways he showed how to use functions in your code. One by passing objects into functions, which is fine, and the other one is using methods on objects. So, or writing functions on objects, which are called methods. But also the importance of understanding how the this keyword works. As a JavaScript community, I see us trying to kind of walk away a little bit from the this reference for a lot of the reasons that you may start to feel, but we are not away from it, and it is still very pervasive. Okay, so I want you to look, and I'll walk you through mine in a minute. Right, using again, I want you to use the Chrome developer tools. Right, so I want you to review my code and then refactor your code using objects. You can use whichever way, and I don't want to say method because that would be confusing, but whichever direction, like the way I've shown, either way, or a combination of the two. You learn more that way, right? And then I also want you to make sure you're outputting to a page. Like if you didn't do that in week 3, which I've only looked at a couple that have posted for week 3, so I can't know how many exactly, right? And here's how you do that, by the way. So let me just, because a couple of you have already seen this, so it's not once you push your code out to GitHub, and this week I want you to continue this idea of using it. So I do that when I'm looking for something. Like we were working under the learn together. Here's week 4. Okay, so here's my index file. So if I click on that, I grab the URL, I copy it, I go over to Git hack, and in this case, I just paste it in. If I get this, I think it's this, let's go see, copy that. So this is the URL. All it does is anyway, we could talk about what it does, but it basically just renders this as a web page. Okay. Notice that little moment there of it put my headings and then it filled it in. It's because GitHub in this case is kind of slow because it's really not meant for production level stuff. So don't get hung up on what it's asking here. And I can't remember why. I tried this one too. It didn't work, but this one worked fine for me. So now that we're back over here, right? So I want you to now, 2 things, output to the page, and you can use the same function. I'll show you how I used it this week. and then provide us a link to that, to your code. Now I've added one additional requirement here, which I didn't do just because I wrote two, but I could. But also in your code, implement either the string or the number methods that Andrew demonstrated. And I think those should be pretty easy for implement just one example of that. Okay, so let me go over this and then I'll talk about dev0. All right, so on my, let me just again open up source here, or open up inspect, right? Go to my source, right? Go to my, I'm going to start with the daily burn one. So let me actually increase this a little bit so you can kind of see this a little better. So what I did here is I took, again, if you remember back to last week, I had two clients. Then I had just some values like breakfast calorie budgets, is active, total calorie I ended up adding. And then what I did here at the bottom is I called calories allowed and then passed in the client object. Okay. So in this case, here's, and by the way, notice how I'm actually using const here. And interesting is I actually could use const on the clients because I'm not redefining the client when I add data to it. So I actually could use const there as well. But I've in this case, my function calories allowed passed in the client. So this allows me to use this function multiple times to then, when I'm passing client, remember what I'm doing is I'm passing the object that I've defined, client 1 or client 2, which is here. So then by calling it client here, my code is somewhat, and this is a term, abstracted away so that it can be if client, so depending on who I've passed in, is active, so it's looking at the object reference here, then it does that same calculation I had before. And then it's updating, right? So client be, these values right here is what this code is doing. So I'm not returning an object, although that is another way you could have done it. What I've done is just passed an object around. And then on calculated budget calories, I again passed in the client and then just said, so I kind of went back and forth of doing this one. I added another property on my object called total calorie budget, and I just set that equal. Now, by the way, and this came up, I can't remember who it was, but remember when you use equal in this case, it's an assignment versus if you're comparing, in that way you would do 2 or 3 for strictly equals. Cover that more later. I think we've covered it a little bit though already. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. All right. So then right here, so then I decided what I'd do here is, again, I did display on page, and that's here, my output version 1, right? But before I did that, I determined daily result, and I passed in the client and the actuals for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then I didn't really have to change my code here much. And this week, I'm not asking for additional functionality, but you could totally. And adding more functionality gives you more to work towards as we are working towards dev0, which I will talk about in a minute. So in this case, I just determined the result. Again, I had to reach out to client dot, total cal budget, which was a calculated property based on my other function. But again, right, so here's what you would do, right, if you want to walk through the code. And that was the whole discussion of why I got here, Rio. So it stops here, right? And by the way, what's great is learning how to just stop and read the screen here a little bit, right? It shows you the client. If you just use your mouse, spend a little time here, step into it. I can see that in this case, it shows me what it passed in, shows me the comparison, right? And in this case, I can actually walk through and I can see, oh, and by the way, after it passes that line, you can see how the value has changed. as well. There is a place I was going to show you. I got client 1 and client 2 display on pages. Actually, and I'll find it probably as soon as I stop talking about it. Watch call stack, right? So this shows you which functions are now being, because if you have a function that calls a function, you can see that call stack in there. All right, so I'm just gonna, so again, I want you to walk through using DevTools at least once or twice, both of my versions of my files. Why isn't my other one there? I did push them. I have a moment here where I'm wondering why that other one isn't. This is locally and it's there. Anyway, so first walk through. I'll make sure both of them are there. I'm not sure what. I have to go look. Sorry. They should both be there. They are. Not sure why this one didn't get it. So what was my point? Distraction. So I want you to walk through both of my versions, study them a little bit. Because again, the one great way to learn how to code well is to learn how to read code. And if there's questions that you have, if there's things you want to talk about, please reach out to me, right? And there's been a really great active chat in this class, which I'm really happy about, right? So what you need to do is once you've done that, think about then your own code and how you could implement objects into that, right? Just to be clear too, on mine, on the second version, let me just close this one out and actually just show you the code on the second one, is what I ended up doing was I just used one client and now I'm calling the objects, calling the methods that I've built placed onto the object, right? So these are called methods, but they're really just object functions. And the difference is here, I can reach inside of this object to reference these values. So I wanted to give you the two examples, right? So in here, I was able to place all these methods onto here. And as I was thinking about, because there's different ways, and as you learn more JavaScript, you're going to learn something called classes or object inheritance, which allows you to then instantiate objects. And that's another way because obviously not obviously, but the thing about objects is you'll end up having a lot of different objects that you'll be using. So one of the things I thought about here is that I could just have created another object just for the client's information and then left all these methods inside of another object that I would have called something like client actions or client something, and then run 2 as well. But I thought, nah, for this example, I just wanted to show you the example of using methods and properties in one object. Okay, so is there a right or wrong way? Well, I think it's more that we're learning different techniques, right? This technique, obviously, like I was saying, and notice even when Andrew was doing his, I think he rebuilt his calculator or the restaurant one, right? Is that because it didn't hold specific data to an individual restaurant, right? It was what we call abstracted away a little bit. So it just held those methods. But as you move forward, you will learn more just about this concept. Okay? All right. So on the second part of this is now it's time to choose. And this is where I reflect back. I probably could have had you guys be not, anyway, it doesn't matter. Now's the time to choose. So whatever you've been doing so far in the Learn Togethers, if that's the concept now that you've worked on a little bit, you're thinking, yeah, I'd like to use moving forward into our first actual development where you're going to take and try to build something on your own that you will come in and do a code review with me, right? If you want to continue using that concept for what Dev 0 will be, then you'll need to use something else for our weekly Learn Together. Okay. And the truth is, the reason is I want you to actually have the experience of creating this on your own. So, and if your concept was different, than whatever you've been using for Learn Togethers, then you're fine, right? It's fine because you have already, hopefully, each week been thinking about, which I would recommend if you haven't, definitely in the next 2 weeks, because we're on week 4. And week 5, I'll have the schedule for the develop it's and all that detail as we can talk about next week. But this week, I just want you to then, in a reply, write one good paragraph about what you hope to accomplish for your first develop it. Now, let me just say, right? So next week we have, and actually, I got to remind myself, so it doesn't hurt to do this. Let's go look where we will be. So for, you will have finished or started. Yeah, so we will have finished arrays. All right, so we're not going to, this is the point, like, this is going to be more like a command line program, even though you can still use this code that I've shown to output to the browser. But it's really after our dev that we move into the browser and learn more about how to create the interfaces for web forms, fields, right? All these really important things. But what I like about this is that, again, we focus on some of these fundamentals. So know that it's really, you're just only going to be out. That's my point, is that just like you saw me, right, outputting content here, that's really what we're going to be doing. And what we're going to add now to your skill base is how to deal with arrays. So you can imagine, right? So based on what we've learned so far and arrays, and again, I'll have the dev 0 drafted probably this week sometime. And again, I'm working ahead a little bit, right? So I'm working ahead a little bit because we're in week 3. So anyway, just FYI, so that is your week 4 Learn Together. I hope you continue to learn how to use the dev tools and how to then implement objects into your code and think about your dev 0. All right, let me know if you have any questions, and I will talk to you soon.